Good afternoon. Welcome to Carrboro Day 2020. My name is Richard Ellington, and I'm a native Carrboroite. And today I'm going to take you on a disjointed journey through some of Carrboro's history. I picked out some things that I think are very interesting to you, but I'm going to show you how our town has changed over our town, and even before it was a town, this area, over the last maybe 200 years. This is a book that Dave Otto and I wrote and had published in 2011 to commemorate the centennial of Carrboro in 2011. Carrboro was founded and it was actually named the town of Venable, and in 1914 they changed the name to Carrboro. If you're interested in acquiring this book, I've got a couple of there are a couple of stores in town that are selling it. Plus, you can contact either Dave or I and get it. And I have some contact info at the end. This is a land grant map that shows land that was granted to folks. This was in the mid 1700s, and this was actually a land grant map of Orange County. And what you see in the dark line is what is the current corporate limits of the town of Carrboro. And you'll see there's a little sticker that says downtown Carrboro. So, you know, that shows you where Carrboro is today, and you'll recognize some names there. You'll see Morgan, and you'll see King, and you'll see Strayhorn, and you'll see Hogan, and Lloyd. You'll see, you know, there's a lot of names of families that are still right here in our community. This is the Weaver House, which is located off Waters Road. And you can see the back section of the house. This is an original log cabin that dates, I've been told, as early as 1740. I don't know that it's really that old, but even if it's only 1800, it's possibly one of the oldest structures in either Carrboro or Chapel Hill. This is the Professor J. Edison Adams and his wife and family. They were actually owned that lived in that house, the Weaver House, and had bought land that became what is now known as the Adams Tract. One of the oldest families in the area is the Hogan family. This is Bob Hogan, who has passed away just recently here, and his son Rob, who has also passed away tragically, much too soon. Rob was one heck of a nice guy. Anyway, the Hogan family has farmed this land since the 1740s. Here's Rob on his farm on Elizabeth Road with Ramses. The family has been the keeper of Ramses since the mascot was created back in, I believe, in the 1920s. This is a site of Kesselberry Mill, which is on Bowling Creek, which dates to the mid to late 1700s. People had to have a mill, you know, had to grind grain. They had to do a lot of things that required some kind of power. And this mill was built, and on directly behind what is now there's a cobblestone and community in the town here. This is a guy, Buck Taylor, who was the first steward at UNC, and his job was to feed the students and make sure that their accommodations were suitable anyway. And he was also noted as being a big drinker, and he's even buried right now. He's buried on his property, which is now part of the Cates Farm neighborhood. And supposedly he was buried in a chair, sitting up with a jug in each hand. Strayhorns were former slaves and one of the earliest families that were living in the area that became Carrboro. They bought property out on Jones Ferry Road, where Jones Ferry just turns off of West Main Street, and they farmed for many, many years. They were self-educated. Tony, of course, slaves were not allowed to be taught to read and write. Tony taught himself to read, how to write, and became a minister, as well as teaching other folks how to how did her, this, if Carrboro has any royalty, it's definitely the story Horne family. This is a picture of Nellie in her later years with her grandson Willis Barbie and his son at the Stroud farm where Nellie's father lived and where she grew up during slavery. This picture was taken about 1940, we understand. This is their house as it looked in the 1960s, which is located on Jones Ferry Road. You know where the thrift shop is. It's about 2 or 3 houses down from the thrift shop. This is Morris and Panthea Hogan. They were both born into slavery, and they were Hogan slaves. After emancipation, they opened a school on Eubanks Road to educate black kids because at the time there were no public schools in the 1880s anyway for anybody. Orange County didn't have any, but they did later about 1885. The new Morris Grove Elementary School, which is very close to the location of their original school, is dedicated in their honor. Carrboro got started because of this little hole in the ground. This is the Iron Mine Company that was created to dig out a large iron deposit that was located under what is now the Ironwood subdivision. This mine opening that you see here has since been closed, but there is a marker that was put up, I believe, in 1979 by the Chapel Hill Historical Society denoting the location of the entrance to the mine. The ore was hauled from here to Greensboro where it was smelted, and the only way to get it there was by railroad. So this is General Robert Hoke, former Confederate general, and the at that time UNC President Kent Battle. They were responsible for getting the North Carolina legislature to actually create what we now call the University Station Spur Railroad from Hillsboro into Carrboro. Without that spur, it would have been impossible to actually move in the iron ore and get it out to the smelter because there was no such thing as a paved road and barely any roads at all. This is the famous train that went back and forth until 1936. They operated with carrying freight and passengers also, so it was known as a mixed consist. Depending on the needs, they had whatever, either freight cars and or passenger cars, depending on what kind of conditions. Supposedly, the 10-mile trip took the better part of an hour, so they were barely creeping along. This engine is a very old wood burner. It was really out of date when it was here because there was so little traffic on this line. They just Richmond and Danville, who ran the rail spur, just allocated just a junky piece of engine to work. The gentleman on the second from the right is the engineer, J.P. Nesbitt. J.P. Nesbitt is on the far right, and Fred Smith, the conductor, is to his right. This is University Station, which was just east of Hillsboro, off of US 70 between Hillsboro and Durham. This was where the Whooper met the North Carolina Railroad main line. William Meade Prince, who a famous author, said he recalled conductor Fred Smith's announcing the arrival at University Station, quote, as if he were offering you a trip to New York and a weekend out the Astoria, out Waldorf, all expenses paid. This is a picture of an earlier depot that was in Carrboro, not the current depot. So I'm told that the guy on the right was named Tom Cole, and of course there are a lot of Coles in this area. I haven't really been able to make any contact with him or connection with him to any of these families. But this was the location where basically where the current station sits in downtown Carrboro, and you can see Carmel Mall, or what is now Carmel Mall, over on the left-hand side. This is the guy, Thomas Lloyd, an illiterate entrepreneur. and of the Lloyd family that had been here since the 1700s, who basically came up with the idea to put a mill here, and that required, of course, getting the railroad spur in so he could bring cotton in and finished materials out. This was Tom Lloyd's first business venture, which was on the railroad tracks between the railroad tracks and Lloyd Street. It was a cotton gin and a grist mill, and it no longer exists. It was, as you see, it was just a wooden structure, and it's been torn down and replaced. There's a brick building that was originally, I think it now says Broad Street painted on the building, that tells you basically where this building used to be. Here are supposedly workers working on Carmel Mall, and based on the shape of that corner behind, it appears this may have been the original of the area which we now know as Elmos, in that area of the building. You see kids there, and you see some lunch pails or whatever. I assume that the kids came and brought their dads their lunches so they wouldn't have to stop and spend a whole lot of time not working. This is the inside of the mill that we now call Carmel Mall. I believe this was on the second floor. I understand that a lot of the processing of the cotton and stuff was on the first floor, and that the actual spinning operations were conducted on the second floor. This monument next to the sidewalk on Weaver Street is the only monument in Carrboro to the man who basically created the town that we now live in. Without Tom Lloyd's mills, there would not have been an influx of folks into our community to create the town. Of course, all sorts of businesses are, when the town started to grow a little bit, all sorts of businesses needed. This is a fellow named Benny Ray. Benny's on the far right of the picture. The guy standing there with his hat in his hand. And the man who's doing the horseshoeing is his son, Atlas Ray. Their business was located close to where Tom Lloyd's original cotton mill and grist mill was located, just off of Lloyd Street. This is the oldest church in Carrboro. You may not recognize it because since it has wood siding on it. This church was built and organized in 1864, and for several years operated just outside. They met outside before they actually had a building. This building was built circa just before the 1900s, and in 1924, I believe it was, or no, 1964, they actually put a brick veneer on it. So what you recognize now is the same building, but with bricks. And you'll notice that the Merritt Mill Road, which is the road in front, was unpaved. This is the original Union Chapel that existed, that was built on land donated by Thomas Lloyd, basically on Weaver Street, right across from his mill, to be a church for the white Baptist and Methodist congregations that they shared. And that's the reason it's called Union, because they had to unite and work together. About 1910, the Methodist Church built their own church down on Main Street, and the Baptists continued to meet here until about 1922, when they built the church that we now call the Century Center. You can see a piece of it on the left-hand side of the screen, the new building. This building was eventually torn down and moved over to Chapel Hill, and became what was known as McDuffie Baptist Church. We now call it North Chapel Hill Baptist Church. This was Reverend J.A. Hackney, one of the early ministers at the Carrboro Baptist Church. And of course, like most ministers, these guys were not itinerant, but yet they went around the countryside and served different people at different times, and quite often served multiple churches. This is what Carrboro Baptist Church looked like in the early 1960s. The left half of the building, which is where Parks and Rec and the police department and some other offices are located, was originally built as an educational building to provide more space for the church. This is Jim Neal's grocery store, or a dry goods store, actually, I guess it is, located on Main Street in Carrboro. It was, if you know where the present-day Rise Biscuit Company is, it was more or less across the street from Rise Biscuit. It was just an old wood frame building. This is the Carrboro Crosstie Market, circa 1920. From about 1890 to 1925, Carrboro had the reputation of being known as the crosstie capital of the world because of the quantity of the cross ties that it produced during that period. The cross ties were important because it gave local farmers a cash crop, and when the weather was bad, you know, they could cut timber and haul it into town in the winter and the fall and winter, you know, before they were actually planting or tending crops or animals. This market died out about between 1925 and 1930, and when the Depression hit, it basically killed the crosstie market. This is Francis Venable, the man for whom the town was originally named. It was interesting because, and nobody really, I haven't been able to figure out exactly how or why they decided to name it after Mr. Venable, because he was not particularly impressed with it. Julian Carr sent him a letter after Carr bought some property here, and and asked the town, Francis, if it would be possible to change the name from Venable to Carrboro. And Francis Venable let him know. He said, I could really care less. This is the original town hall, business office, and fire station that Carrboro had for many years until it acquired what is the old Carrboro Hall, town hall that we have now in the 60s. This photo was taken circa 1950. You see that there's a little wooden tower behind there. That was the fire tower. Carrboro had a volunteer fire department, which I'll show you later. And if there was a fire reported, that there was a siren that went off in that little tower, and so everybody knew to run to their stations. This is the Carrboro Methodist Church as they were celebrating their centennial in 2010. I told you they separated off at the Union Chapel and built their church on Main Street. And then this is their current location just off of Shelton Street. This is Julian Carr, much maligned and then deservedly so. Julian Carr bought Thomas Lloyd's Alberta Mill in 1909 and changed it to Durham Hosiery Mill number 4. He already had additional mills, and I think he had 2 in Durham and 1 in Burlington or Graham area. He allegedly made improvements to the town's infrastructure, and so at his request, the town's name was changed from Venable to Carrboro in 1913. This is the first school building that was located in Carrboro. It was built around the turn of the century, about 1900, and was located on Center Street. It was, I believe, it's the 3rd house on the left after you turn off of Weaver Street. It was a school building until about 1910, and they needed more space, so a new building was built, and I'll show you that one later. Interesting to me, this is after the house became a residence, after it was a school. And you notice the people sitting on a step. The little girl on the far right on the step, holding the stick, is my mother. Her name is Beulah Villahay. And she was born in Durham, but her dad came to work in the mill here from working in urban mills in Durham. And so she lived on the corner of Weaver and Greensboro, where there is now the chain linked lot. That's where my mother grew up. The lady, the short lady next to the left inside is her mother and my grandmother, Miss Effie Cole Villahay. This lady is Sheila Purefoy, who was a Carrboro School marm in the early 1920s. And I'm not sure where this picture was taken, but it's obviously a log cabin. I don't think there was any log cabin schools. Anyway, this is the school, the Carrboro Second School, that was located on West Main Street. And this was a picture taken with all the students and teachers on the back side of the school. The West Main Street was on the left-hand side of this photo, if you're looking at it. This was schools in use until from the early 1900s until about 1922. It was torn down, and the animal hospital now stands on Main Street where this building was located. This is what you might call a typical mill house, or whatever a typical mill house might be. Contrary to popular belief, not all of the houses in Carrboro that are being referred to as mill houses were mill houses. The mill did produce a few. They perhaps as many as 24, but not nearly as many as has been denoted as being a mill house. And this is a floor plan for a typical mill house. You notice they're sparse on rooms, and you'll also notice that there is no indoor plumbing. Most people had a little outhouse in the back. This is Carrboro's first post office. It was probably actually in location when Carrboro was still named Venable, and was just the sign was probably changed later. Hadn't been able to find out exactly when the post office was established here. It was located on Main Street across from the current depot. There's a parking lot there now, you know, the parking lot across the street from the depot and/or Armadillo Grill. This is where that building sat. This was a second mill that Thomas Lloyd built, and when he sold the what we now call Carmel to Julian Carr, he and a cousin went over on Robertson Street and built another mill. And then when Thomas Lloyd died, I believe it was 1911, they continued to operate the mill for a while, but then they later sold it to Julian Carr, and he bought it and renamed it Durham Hosier Mill No. 7. When this building was torn down in the mid-60s, the bricks were donated by the guy, Ed Yagi, who owned the property, and they were used to build the South Orange Rescue Squad that's located on Robertson Street. This is a Sanborn insurance map of Carrboro in 1911. You'll notice the mill is up in the upper left-hand corner, and and you'll see that there are mill houses that are in the lot there. And you'll notice also that there is no Main Street. It was in 1911. It was still known as Jones Ferry Road because the town had just basically been formed, and they hadn't even gotten around to renaming the street. This is another later photo of 1925 of a Sanborn insurance map. And if you look in the bottom left corner, you'll see that the mill has been extended and that there's a couple of houses missing. So, when the mill was extended out toward Greensboro, what we now call Greensboro Street, now it was then known as Greensboro Road, I believe, they had to take a couple of three of these houses down. In the 1930s, mid-1930s, after the mill had closed and was closed for a number of years because of depression, these houses were sold off and they were required to be moved off the property. And so that's where a lot of the houses in town, came from, is here. Now, what I understand, I've been told that they were sold off for $600 a piece, that you had to pick them up and move them yourself. This cute little lady is my mother again, standing in her backyard. And you'll see there's Carmel Mall, and you'll see a couple of, three houses behind her. This was when there was an addition put onto the mill, and you see there's only one row of houses there on the street. So this picture was made circa 1925. This is Main Street, Carrboro, about 1924. There's a Model T there, and I've been told that Model T belonged to Dr. Lloyd, that he was the only man in town that actually had a car at that in circa 1924. You see there's a woman dressed in white who's walking up the street, and I've been told that that was Millie Strayhorn, and that the little kid who's walking down the street to the right was one of her grandchildren. This little lady was named, everybody called her Mamie Oakley, but her name was Cora Oakley. She had her family house. She rented rooms. They lived on Carr Street, and she had a habit of visiting every Carrboro business at least once every week. She would either just go buy something, or even if she didn't need anything, she'd go in and check with the proprietors, and just made herself well loved in the town. And the story is that when she died, every business in town closed so the shopkeepers could attend her funeral and pay their respects. Not sure who the little kid is. It's probably a grandchild. This was the third building that built in Carrboro that was a school. This building was built in 1922 and was a school until 1959, when the present day Carrboro Elementary School was constructed. Of course, this building is now the town hall. You notice there was just steps in the front door. You know, there's no facade, no columns and porch on the front like we have now. You notice that tree though. That's now a huge nationally recognized heritage elm, and it's as elms are an endangered species due to blight. This is the original Fitch Lumber Company dynasty. These folks came and set up business about 1920 in Carrboro. They were actually operating a lumber company in Mebane with some other folks. And the gentleman in the middle, who is Mr. Abner Fitch, decided to come to Carrboro and set up a business. And from the two gentlemen on his right are his sons. The one gentleman immediately on his left is another son, and the fellow on the far right is a grandson. This was Fitch Lumber Company sawmill, which was located on Lloyd Street. That smoke, what you see, that's not steam. What they did was they would actually, when they milled the lumber, they would actually burn the sawdust and whatever, and just to dispose of it, whatever. The little boxes, what appeared to be large boxes all parked in a row that you see there in the bottom left-hand corner, and even in the middle of the screen, are not boxes. That's actually lumber that's been stacked up for drying. This guy, Tally Hardy. Tally came from South Carolina, brought his family here about 1920, and he operated a grocery store and a meat market and a firewood operation on Main Street, and actually on the corner of Main Street and Greensboro Street. And when he died, his son took over the business and ran the business until the late 1970s, I believe 1977, when he sold the business to Cliff Collins. And that building is still in operation in the same location, but it's now known as Cliff's Meat Market. The first building that Tally had was actually just a wooden frame, and he had it was draped with cloth and with windows that he just would lift up and open for when he was open for business, and then just drop them when the business day was over. And then he later, of course, replaced it with the building that we see there now. This is the famous or infamous Dr. Braxton Lloyd. Dr. Lloyd was known as a fancier of hogs, and you see him posed here with one. The story goes, he heard of a prize boar hog that was up for sale in Fayetteville in the 30s. And so he conned a friend of his into taking his truck and going down and with him and to pick the pig up. And they got the pig back to town, and as they were trying to get the pig off the truck, the pig got upset, and of course, being a large animal, he proceeded to lay waste to the back end of the truck. And the story was that he broke the axle of the truck. They finally got him out of the truck, and Dr. Lloyd made good on the repairs for the truck. These are a few folks that you see there are all sorts of names. There's Sims, there's Rigsby's, there's Ray's. There's folks here that have families have been here for many, many years. These guys were all volunteer fire department. And the cart that you see there, they had several of these carts that were stored in little metal sheds in several locations in town. And wherever the fire was located, they'd go get the hose from the closest shed. And they had guys that were identified as runners. And it was their job to go get the hose and run it to the house, and then they would hook them up. You ever heard of Sparrow's Pool? The pool is still there. It's just now private residences. This was Sparrow's Pool, which is down off of the old Pittsburgh Road. And this picture was taken in the late 1940s. Busy place, and that water was cold as ice. It was a spring, and they would drain it once a week, and it would take all day to refill it, and a week or so, I'll say. And when it was filled, it was just ice cold but crystal clear. Carrboro, like many towns that had mills, also had a baseball team. Now, a lot of these guys were not necessarily connected to the mill, but they did like to play ball. And I mean, the Hillsboro had ball teams that they're in the mills that were in Hillsboro, and most in the South, most towns that had a mill that was actually any size at all typically had a baseball team, because it was, you know, kind of like the only game in town. This is the annual Maypole Dance that in front of Carrboro School. What you see there is you're looking at Main Street in Carrboro, from the town hall now. And this was 1933. This is the May Queen for 1933. The lady sitting in the middle of the little kid is Carly Williams. And Carly told me a story about this. Said that the little girl who was on the left front in the dark hair was actually chosen. Her name was Rachel Blunt. She was actually chosen to be the May Queen. And the principal of the school at the time said, no, the May Queen really ought to be blonde. So the May Queen, the school principal changed Rachel, took Rachel off the stand and put Carly on the stand, because Carly was a blonde. She said Rachel and I were lifelong friends. This is, you see pulpwood trucks, you know, waiting to be unloaded or loaded onto rail cars. Pulpwood was a very profitable business. Once again, you know, when the crosstie industry died, farmers, you know, still needed, you know, income and whatever, and a lot of guys actually became pulpwood harvesters for full time. And this, of course, was then used, you know, to buy. They was sold to, you know, the paper companies, and they, you know, made paper with it. And this worked until about the late 60s, early 70s, when a lot of the companies, you know, Weyerhaeuser and Union Camp and the other large paper producers decided to just look after their own stuff and started managing their own forests, and basically put, you know, the small pulpwood organizations out of business. Piece of excitement that occurred when I was a kid in 1954, Hurricane Hazel came through town, and it came through on a school day in the morning, and we were in school when it hit. And of course, back then we didn't have all, you know, the radar and everything else, you know, to know about it. So when the storm hit, everybody, you know, we all hid under our desks. I think I was in the 3rd grade. When the storm passed, or the leading edge of the storm passed, and when the eye was overhead, everybody said, well, shoot, you know, the storm's over. So everybody, all the kids were sent home. And of course, since nearly all of us walked, you know, I remember walking home and striking out to walk home. I only lived about a half a mile away. And all of a sudden, the backside of the storm comes and hits us. And by the time I got home, I took off running. I was soaking wet, and lucky to feel there. And after I got home, I stood out in the window and watched, you know, as tree limbs blew by. And we did have a little damage. there were several cars and trees and stuff that were down. I don't know how trees know, but they always like to fall on cars. But and it happened in a couple of places in Carrboro, and this is one of them. This is the entire mill worker population and what was then Pacific Mills in 1957. As you see, there's about 120 people there. I've tried to count heads, and a lot of the people here are husband and wife. So there were not a whole lot of households that were represented as being supported by the mill. I have often said that Carrboro is not a mill town. It's really a railroad town that had mills, because the mills were open and closed and open and closed, and really only served a relatively small piece of the community. With the university close by, a lot of people in Carrboro worked as tradesmen at the university, probably more so than people that worked in the mills. This map shows you what Carrboro looked like and what it now looks like. The brown section you see is what Carrboro looked like in 1960. That was the corporate limits. And you see what in 1970 was added onto, and so every decade you see here, and you can tell just Carrboro, I think, is now probably at least 5, if not 6 times its original size, or from the 1960 size. This is Grady Sturtevant, Mr. Friendly Barbershop. Grady knew everybody in town, and if you wanted to catch up on a local gossip and local news, or just get a new joke, you went to the Friendly Barbershop and just sat down and talked to Grady or listened to Grady, and then sometimes even got your hair cut. Grady's son has continued the tradition of the Friendly Barbershop and the original location. Grady originally had a friend, Clyde Jones, who was also a barber, and the two of them were a mutt and Jeff if ever was any. This fellow on the left is Jacques Menage, and Jacques is famous for creating what we now call the Art Center. It was originally, I think, called Art Studio, I think. He started giving classes, art classes, painting and other such crafts on Main Street, Carrboro, over top of what is now the Armadillo Grill and some other stores along there. There's a set of stairs that go up and to access that space. And then as his time grew, he needed more and more space and was in the process of moving 2 or 3 times. And Jacques has since no longer connected with the Art Center, but the Art Center continues and is operates an even more varied art selection. Of course, you can't talk about Carrboro and Chapel Hill without talking about the Cat's Cradle, which is a music icon in the community for so many years. It's been back and forth from Carrboro to Chapel Hill to Carrboro to Chapel Hill a number of times, just looking for available space, cheap available space, because of course you've got to have a lot of room if you're going to have a performance venue. It's well loved by everybody. This is a picture of the first black mayor in Carrboro, and actually in the first black mayor in the Southeast, I believe, a fellow named Robert Drakeford. He was mayor from 77 to 1983. And he's standing there congratulating Carl Ellington, who's my father, who was working in for the town of Carrboro at the time. And they named a building down in Public Works in his honor. Here we have Ella Kinnear, who was mayor from 87 to 95. And Ellie also had served as an alderman before that. And then after she left the town for mayor, she ran successfully in the North Carolina Senate and was very instrumental in a lot of legislation there. She was perhaps most famous, which is why this picture was taken, standing at the farmer's market, because Ellie had the germ of the idea that created the farmer's market, and it was established with a set of rules and regulations to make sure that it was basically juried, and they were very strict in the kinds of products that could be sold. And they have created a model that many, many other towns have used to create their farmers markets. This is Mike Nelson. Mike was the first openly gay Southern mayor of a Southern town. And he had been an alderman prior to running for mayor. And after he was mayor, he moved on and became Orange County Commissioner for, I believe, 2 terms. And has since kind of backed out of politics. Mike was a heck of a nice guy. Now, the Carrboro we know now wouldn't be a Carrboro without Weaver Street. I mean, it's the magnetic attraction in downtown right now, it seems. This is the original location of Carmel. They started out on Weaver Street, hence the name. And they now have branches in Hillsboro, Chapel Hill, and Raleigh. So the local business doing well, and we wish them well, and enjoy shopping there and seeing their exquisite materials that they have for sale. These folks live out on 54 West, and back when Orange County still had segregated schools, they attended a school that was known as the Hickory Grove Elementary School, which was a 2-room school, and that's where they're standing right now. The building was moved off of, it was on Hickory Grove Bethel Church Road, and a lady named Natalie Borman purchased it to use as a studio, and she had it moved over onto Highway 54 right across from where Neville Road runs into Highway 54. These guys were students there, and they told us some stories about going to school at the Hickory Grove School. They said and when it was cold, one kid each week was appointed to show up early and crank up the wood stove and try to warm the room up, before the rest of the kids showed up. And they also, since they didn't have there was no, bathroom facilities, they had to get water for drinking and for washing their hands and stuff. So they went over to a neighbor's well and got water. And they said one time they had a problem with little worms, tiny little worms like caterpillars that got in the well. And what they did was they just, strained it through a piece of cloth and got the worms out, just drank the water anyway. You put up with what you got to, I guess. Tough people. This is what is known as the Hackney Training School. It was in Carrboro on the Carrboro side of Merritt Mill Road. At the time, and still is, Merritt Mill Road, was the dividing line between Carrboro and Chapel Hill. And Reverend Hackney, who was the minister at what was called White Rock Baptist Church, later became First Baptist Church, operated a school for kids because at the time there was some county support, but it was almost token for the Black community. And so he set up this school, and it actually the families had to pay a little bit of money because he got a little bit of county money, but not a whole lot. And this school operated in conjunction also with that after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, the Quaker Friends community sent a gentleman to Carrboro Chapel Hill to establish a school. And it operated until about 1913, I believe. And it was also located in Carrboro. Don't have any pictures of those because the building was destroyed long ago. But there was a whole raft of effort made to try within the local community to provide at least some minimal education for the Black kids in town. This is a school that was built in 1924, and it was originally known as the Orange County Training School. The kids that had gone to the Hackney School and the Quaker School, ended up going into this school. That's where any Black children from Carrboro went to school. And in 1948, the building was renamed Lincoln High School and operated as Lincoln High School because just bad connotations with the title Orange County Training School. It sounds almost like a juvenile detention or reform school. So, and although that's exactly what it was, because it was just assumed that in the early 1900s that black kids were not going to go off to college or anything, so they needed to be taught a trade. So that's exactly basically what the school was. It was to give kids rudimentary educations so that they could get out and make a living. Of course, the new Lincoln Elementary or Lincoln High School was built on Merritt Mill Road in 1952, and that now serves as the Chapel Hill Carrboro School System headquarters. And when Lincoln moved to the new building, then this building became an elementary school and is known as Northside. I was privileged to be able to see an actual diploma that was handed out from Orange County Training School prior to 1948. This is Midway Barber Shop, which is located in the Midway community, Midway between Chapel Hill and Carrboro. And it's been in operation since 1946, which makes it the oldest black-owned business in Carrboro. It's now run by Step Edwards, who's the guy, the blue tunic there, who's the father or the son of the founder. This lady is Eva Barnett. Eva operated a hair salon and whatever, basically across from or very close to where the Midway Barber Shop is located. She'd did hair for over 5 decades. She would go to the homes of people who were shut in and do their hair just so they could have something nice in their day. And because of a lot of the community work that she did for free, a lot of it, in 2019, the Chapel Hill Historical Society named her as a community treasure for our community. Greenbridge Development, which sits basically just on the border of Carrboro and Chapel Hill, represents some high-rise development trends that loom on the horizon for Carrboro and Chapel Hill in the area. Since land's so expensive, people feel they've got to go up instead of going out. This is a picture of the redevelopment on 300 East Main Street. Most of this development has been taken care of. The hotel complex, the parking lot complex, some of the stores, but not the middle of the development still is yet to be completed. Not exactly sure when it's going to happen, but here again, Carrboro's going up, not out. This great blue heron seen fishing in Bowling Creek represents some of the natural beauty that is still evident in Carrboro in spite of all the recent growth and whatever. Carrboro has when I was a kid and living in Carrboro in 1960, I believe the population was roughly 2,000 people. Carrboro now has something that's almost 10 times that. So a lot has happened in Carrboro, and a lot more is going to happen. It's a great place to live, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. Thank you. If you have any questions or comments, here's some contact information. You can either contact me by email, or if you want, just give me a call. I'd be glad to talk to you if you have questions about anything you heard here today, or if you've got other questions you'd like to ask about Carrboro. This obviously was not a whole lot of information, but I just thought I would show you a lot of some of the interesting people and some of the interesting places and things that used to exist in Carrboro, and some of them still do. Thank you very much.